Hello and welcome. You're listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment. In this segment, we're going to be speaking with Mr. John Glasspool. He's joining us here from Anthos Therapeutics to talk about their lead product. It's an anticoagulant that's in development for the prevention of cancer-related thrombosis. Welcome to Health Professional Radio. Mr. Glasspool, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invite, Neil.
Tell us a bit about who you are and what your area of expertise is.
Sure, Neil. So I'm the CEO of Anthos Therapeutics. I'm a board member at BIO, the Industry Innovation Association in the United States. My background is a long time in the biopharma industry on the development and commercialization side, and have been involved in the development and commercialization of around 22 drugs in my career.
And Anthos Therapeutics?
It's strictly a biotech. We actually are developing a monoclonal antibody for the treatment and prevention of thrombus. It's a very novel technology. It's a factor 11 inhibitor. It, in fact, is a dual inhibitor of factor 11. And we believe this will be very beneficial to patients, providers, and professionals due to the fact that we think we will be in a position, subject to the clinical trial results, to show that we can protect people from a thrombus while not increasing their bleeding. This is because we believe factor 11 uncouples from the hemostatic system, is not needed for normal hemostasis, plays its role predominantly in thrombosis. And so by inhibiting that, we protect people from the thrombus while leaving their hemostatic system intact. And of course, that thrombus, kills 1 in 4 people. It's a huge burden on healthcare systems because obviously a thrombus end result is very often a stroke, which is very costly, very debilitating to patients with a high morbidity and a high mortality. Mm-hmm. So we think this is an important disease area to work on, Neil.
What's the historical go-to when dealing with thrombosis? I know obviously physicians would rather not deal with anticoagulants for fear of that continued bleeding, but what is the go-to treatment to deal with thrombosis?
Yeah, the go-to treatments, depending on where you are in the world, are warfarin or DOACs, the 10A inhibitors, or low molecular weight heparin. So these are the 3 go-tos depending on the situation that the patient presents and the disease state that you're trying to intervene in. They all protect patients. They all obviously should be used where indicated. Unfortunately, they all work directly in what's called the common pathway. So all of those agents currently they certainly protect you from clots. And I, of course, would encourage everybody that you should be protected using one of these agents. But equally, they have downsides in the fact that because they interfere with your normal hemostatic system, they increase the risk of bleeding.
What about clots in specific parts of the body? Are they much more problematic when it comes to treating them with the historical treatments, depending on where they are in the body, or do different compounds work specifically in certain areas of the body?
They work essentially throughout the body. I think different areas depend on different elements. So warfarin requires a significant amount of monitoring, for example. In our space of cancer-associated thrombosis, none of the current DOACs are actually indicated for that. They're used by guideline, but the guidelines say that you shouldn't use a DOAC if you have a GI or a GU cancer, because of the increased rate of bleeding in those patients. And for that population, you should use low molecular weight heparin. So the utility is really driven about the individual patient type, what other comorbidities they have, and the importance of the relative tolerability profile of the agents. The other area, of course, is low molecular weight heparin is a daily injection, and of course that's also quite burdensome on the provider and on the patient. And so our treatment, when it comes to market, is a monthly sub-Q injection. So that also we think is a much lower burden on the patient, helps adherence, and a benefit to the provider in knowing that once monthly treatment is there rather than a daily injection.
Talk about the trial for your lead product, the design, the analysis design of your trial.
So abelacimab is being studied. The program in cancer-associated thrombosis contains 2 studies. One study is when patients present with a thrombus with GI-GU cancer, and that study compares the product to low molecular weight heparin due to the fact that the DOACs are not recommended in that space. If you present with a thrombus in with all other cancer types other than GIGU, you go into a separate study that compares you with apixaban, which is a DOAC. So the design between the two studies is identical. It's the patient criteria and the comparator that changes. And it's really based on what we've learned and understood from the cancer-associated thrombosis trials to date. But the combination of the two studies, should they both be positive, will obviously give a provider a one-stop shop in order to be able to say, right, this product can be used whatever cancer type a patient has when they present with a thrombus. The burden is very high in cancer-associated thrombosis. It's about 3.5 times higher than if you don't have cancer. There's about a 6.5 time recurrence rate if you have cancer versus you don't have cancer. And of course, so there's a high unmet need, but no one has actually gone and undertaken a registration program for this disease area. So that's the first thing we're hearing, a recognition that Anthos with abelacimab is actually seeking a formal approval from regulators. Very much excites clinicians and providers with that benefit. The profile then is also received very good feedback. Because of that hypothesis, the lack of bleeding is obviously potentially a great benefit. Also, because the way the drug is metabolized, it doesn't matter if the patient has some renal or liver impairment. Many cancer patients are on many other medications, and so the fact that we don't have any interactions with those medications is very much welcome. And then the lack of burden in administration with being a monthly treatment versus daily or twice daily tablets or daily injections is also seen to be a benefit for patients, professionals, and providers in the feedback we've received.
Well, give us a website where we can learn more about your company. And I do believe that this data was published in the New England Journal of Medicine.
The evidence that enabled us to undertake these two trials in cancer-associated thrombosis, Neil, was published in the New England Journal in July last year. Mm-hmm. If this is an area of interest to any of your listeners, obviously they can go to anthostherapeutics.com, and the website contains many of the papers that we've mentioned and gives you an overview of the work that we're doing in this space. What I'd like to do, Neil, is use this opportunity to thank the providers that allow clinical trials to be undertaken in their institutions, to thank the professionals that undertake these clinical trials, and most importantly, thank the patients and their loved ones that enable us to develop what we hope are better therapeutics in the future. And we very much appreciate the support of providers in enabling these clinical trials to take place.
Well, I appreciate you giving us some of your time this morning. Thank you so much for joining us here on Health Professional Radio. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
And a pleasure to speak to you, Neil. Thank you very much, and thank you to your listeners.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with John Glasspool, CEO of Anthos Therapeutics. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Listen in, download a SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.